Welcome to the next episode of the Entrepreneurial Excellence podcast. It is great to have Todd Masonis with me today. He is the head chocolatier, but really also the CEO and founder of Dandelion Chocolate, also the founder of a company who many people today probably don't know well, but was a really big success back in the day called Plaxo. And he's someone who I just find fascinating, not only because he makes some of the best chocolate in the world, which I'm happy to be someone who eats on a regular basis, not great for my health, but eats on a regular basis, but also just someone who is kind of a rare breed who has built not only a software company, but then has gone in a completely different direction and built a direct-to-consumer or consumable chocolate company. And yet both have been successful. And that is someone I want to talk with, and I think who is perfect for our podcast. So Todd, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me on.
It's absolutely my pleasure. So one of the first questions that I want to maybe ask people when I get started is, well, actually, maybe before we talk about this, would love to give a brief update just on your background and history. So you basically went from what I can see on LinkedIn and what we've talked about previously. I mean, you basically went from high school to Stanford, straight into Plaxo almost, and then straight from Plaxo basically into Dandelion. And Dandelion's been almost 15 years of Dandelion. And I guess Plaxo was about 8 years. So you've kind of gone from like school, company, all success. I mean, getting to Stanford is not an easy thing. Building a company that has success is not an easy thing. Building another company that has success is not an easy thing. Walk me through that little bit of history, and I'll certainly explain to people what Plaxo was and how that got started.
Yeah, for sure. So, I think you've got it right. I grew up on the East Coast, and then I went out to Stanford, class of 2001. And that was a really fun time to be at Stanford. It was very entrepreneurial. I remember people were starting companies left and right. And I remember at the time, I think it was, Yahoo was the big success and Excite was the big success. And everyone was talking about starting companies. There's really a culture of entrepreneurship. And I had always wanted to start a company. I was always really interested in technology, really interested in business. And, it's funny though, I graduated in 2001, and that was right after the first internet bubble had burst. And so it kind of went from a very exciting time for startups to a very weird time for startups because it had crashed and no one was investing, but I was still very interested. And so some friends of mine and I started a company together, a company called Plaxo, which one of the other co-founders was Sean Parker, you might know from Napster and some other things. And originally it was kind of Sean's idea about kind of this idea of like a self-updating address book. And it's kind of funny because you think like, why do you need that now? But really it was a precursor to social networking. Back in the day, there was no way to get your offline contacts online. And so we developed all this like viral marketing where you would join, it would send out emails and we'd connect. And it was sort of before there was LinkedIn, before there was Facebook, before there was Friendster, but there was basically no social networking. We were kind of one of the first in that space. So we worked on it for many, many years. We had a lot of ups and downs, and we were pretty fortunate to sell it in 2008, right before the bubble burst again. And, so sort of good timing. And we eventually sold it to Comcast, and I stayed on with Comcast for about a year. It was kind of weird going from a 100-person company to a 100,000-person company, but it definitely was really interesting to see how larger companies operate and what they think about and their time scales. And then had a little bit of free time. With startups, you don't really get nights, weekends, vacation, whatever. You're kind of always on. And so I said, I want to take a year or two and just kind of, enjoy things I didn't get a chance to do before. I went on archaeological digs, I took classes, just kind of did fun things, kind of made up for lost time. And one of the things that I'd always loved was chocolate. I loved eating chocolate. I wouldn't say I had the most sophisticated palate. I just loved it. But I had been able to travel and visit a few places in France where there was still actually the sort of family chocolate maker. People have been around for 150 years, roasting up beans, and realized that in America, no one was roasting beans and actually making chocolate from the bean on a small scale. That just did not exist. It was all industrial chocolate. Maybe at the time there was fewer than 10 companies that were making chocolate from the actual cocoa bean on a small scale. So no one was doing it. And so my friends and I and my wife, we all tried making some chocolate at home. We took over a friend's garage. We started roasting up beans. We started building small machines. We'd go to Home Depot and buy PVC pipes and duct tape and vibrating massagers and whatever we needed to build little machines that could move things around. And we made our first batch of chocolate. It was really, really good. We got really lucky, but the first batch was really good. But it was like, the chocolate that we sort of stumbled upon was as pure as it could be. It was just beans and sugar, nothing else. Cocoa beans and sugar, 2 ingredient. So most high-end chocolate has added cocoa butter, vanilla, less than other additives and flavorings. But our chocolate was pretty different, tasted different. And then we started selling it. We started selling it at the underground market, which was like a farmer's market. We didn't health permits. We're doing all the experiments. And before we knew it, people seemed to love our chocolate. we realized that we were onto something. And now we know that we were kind of at the start of the American craft chocolate movement, kind of like what happened to specialty coffee. Third wave coffee is happening in chocolate. And we just happened to be right place, right time, stumbled upon it. And then we started building Dandelion. So it just kind of happened naturally.
Although I will say, I mean, you say it happened naturally, and you sort of said in a bunch of your description, like, oh, well, it got lucky, timing was good, all this other stuff. I don't tend to fully believe in luck. I mean, part of it is somehow, you didn't just get lucky by having a fantastic first batch of chocolate. You clearly had done some research before that. You had done a lot of experimentation. What does that really mean, right? If I push back on like luck, and you're being maybe self-deprecating, what does that really mean, right? You're creating your own luck. So what does that look like in your mind to be an excellent entrepreneur? You have to create that luck in somehow. So what does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's funny. I have a lot of thoughts on luck because they always say luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity, and I think that's true. And it's funny. There was a study that was done a while back where they were trying to study luck and determine why are some people lucky, and they invited people in and had them fill a survey like, are you a lucky person? Are you an unlucky person? And afterwards, the real test is they left $20 on the floor and tried to see who picked it up. And it turns out that the unlucky people didn't pick up the money and the lucky people did, is because they determined that luck is really just kind of going through life with eyes wide open and looking for opportunities and looking for connections and talking to people. And so like, I do think I've been pretty lucky to be very fortunate to meet a lot of really cool people and have a lot of opportunities. But I also think like when things come along, you kind of have to go with them and see where things lead. So I think it's both.
Do you think there's a level of, when you think back through, right, that Stanford class of 2001, Stanford, of course, is well known for creating so many amazing startups. Do you think there's something that stood out that made you different than other people? Was it that your eyes are wider open? You have a bigger lens than other people? What made you, out of that entire class, there are probably only a few who had the level of financial success and outcomes that you had with Plaxo. There probably aren't that many. And by the way, I don't know if you can talk about it publicly, but can you talk to people at least a little bit about what level of success that looked like for Plaxo?
I mean, I think we were sold for, I think it was like 180 million. And obviously we have investors. And so, whatever, but
still
also
100 person company, 180 million, not too shabby.
yeah. And also, it's funny, valuations have changed a lot in, 20 something years. So, back in the day, I remember, starting a startup back then was kind of a little bit different. Like we had to like get co-location facilities and build our own servers and put them in. And, there was no AWS, there was no all this support. So it was a very different world. It was definitely the wild, wild west. And so things were a little bit different. I think a lot of the things now are sort of ancient history, but it was kind of a unique moment in time. But can you remind me what the first part of the question was?
The question is like, what do you think, you think through that really successful class, like you still stood out, right? If you think about the class of 2001 and all of your colleagues from that class year, there probably aren't that many, even though it's still Stanford, who've had the level of financial outcomes, right? Success. We'll go back to defining success in a second, but like financial outcomes that you achieved with Plaxo. What do you think, what would you view as your differentiating factor for yourself to help you achieve that?
I think people get into startups or starting companies for different reasons. And I think at the time, especially in the first bubble, there were a lot of people who were rushing in just because they liked the idea of making money, or they liked the idea of something, a quick flip, or, it'd be more financially lucrative than some other career in law or some other industry. And I think there are people who like starting companies because they want to create something, or they want to work hard at something, or they want to, build something new. And I think I and my friends were definitely in the camp of we want to build something new. And, when the whole internet bubble burst, all the people who were just doing it as like the new cool, quick thing, I think they immediately left. Whereas the people who were kind of in it for, they wanted to build something and were willing to deal with the grind. And, we fundraised for a year back then. Like we were grinding it out. I mean, I remember Sean Parker used to sleep on my couch, and none of us had a job, and my girlfriend, my now wife, supported us, and we would, search through the couch cushions to find quarters to go to In-N-Out. It's like, it's not the thing you do if you're like doing this because you're like want to get rich quickly. Like you have to want to do it for the right reasons. And so I think there's just, only a certain number of people willing to put themselves through that. And so that maybe is a differentiator, maybe.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And I think that there's a lot of parallels to, I think, what we've seen over the past few years too, right? There are a lot of people who, it became, instead of going to become a banker or a consultant or something, you're like, I'm gonna do the cool thing and become an entrepreneur and go raise millions of dollars and go into Y Combinator. And it's like, yeah, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. I mean, I'm biased as well. Like, you have been in this long enough now, and like, you got to be doing it because you like love love just the joy of building something new and testing yourself every day against that versus a lifestyle choice. Cause it's not a healthy lifestyle choice in most cases.
Yeah, it can be hard. There's a lot of work. It can be very lonely. There are definite times, multiple times where both companies could have and should have got out of business, lots of things that happen. And so you kind of have to be in it for the right reasons. Otherwise, you would have given up.
So going back to sort of one of the first questions I like to ask everyone, which is sort of how do you define excellence? Like, what does entrepreneurial excellence look like in your mind? What is an excellent entrepreneur? And then secondarily, and related to that, what is success, or how do you define success? Or is it financial? Is it lifestyle? Is it, how do you define those? So sort of excellence and then success, and what are your definitions?
Let's see. Well, so maybe I'll take those in reverse order. I'll start with what I think success looks like, or what success looks like for Dandelion, in the sense that, like we already had an exit, we already had made some money. And so the goal wasn't solely like, we didn't look at a market analysis and say, there's an opportunity with, 22 to 40-year-olds for craft chocolate and blah, blah, blah. And, we're going to, take over this segment. We just did it because we wanted this to exist in the world. Like we wanted to build something.
I want to pause there for a second. I bet if you did do a market analysis, I'm guessing like the consultants who would do that market analysis was that there was no market for Dandelion type chocolates because it didn't exist at the time. Right? Because what you were saying, it was all massive, big, Nestle or whomever conglomerates and Hershey's chocolate, and that was it.
Yeah. I mean, maybe they could have looked and said, well, this has happened in coffee, this has happened in craft beer, this happened in wine. So maybe there's a parallel. But I think that's a hard leap to make. The challenge with chocolate is like the youngest real company in the space is Valrhona. And Valrhona is an awesome company, but they celebrated their 100th birthday last year. So the youngest company in the space is over a century old. This is a space that got disrupted and then solidified a century to a century and a half ago. And no one's done anything in the last century. And so, you can look at that as like, wow, this is really hard and it's never going to change. Or there's a really big opportunity to disrupt kind of the way people have been eating chocolate for a long time. These big industrial makers, you just get junk beans that don't cost very much and you burn them. And then you add lots of flavorings to them to make them palatable. And that's what everyone thinks chocolate is. And so I think for us, going back to what's the goal, we would like to join that pantheon of companies that's around for over a century, right? We would like to be the sort of the new wave of chocolate that, in 100 years is still standing and has been built for the long term. So I think we're trying to take a pretty long-term view. We're trying to build the market. We're trying to build the industry. We are trying to build something that's going to last a really long time, which I think is like kind of antithetical to your normal tech startups, because generally, tech startups that are funded by venture capitals need to hit a certain IRR, which means they have to have a certain return within a certain time frame, which means you're not going to build something for 100 years. And so it's just a different thing. So our definition of success is a company that can be around for a century. In terms of entrepreneurs and what makes an entrepreneur successful, I think that's a tough one. I think that there are different ways to be successful and many different approaches. I don't think that there's one perfect way to be successful. And so I think for me personally, I'm just trying to build something that I want to exist in the world. And I get to work with people I really like every day and go into awesome locations every day. And I get to drink hot chocolate every day and eat chocolate every day. So, I think people often said like, hey, if you ever sold your company and made some money, what would you want to do? And it's like, well, I want to start a chocolate factory. I'm already living the dream. So I'm feeling pretty good about that.
A little bit like Charlie and Chocolate Factory without the Oompa Loompas, probably. Do you, speaking of that, excuse me to everybody listening, a little bit of a cold. When you think through building a team, what are the cultural norms or team elements that you have used at Plaxo and either have done differently or are the same for you at Dandelion?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously the jobs are different between chocolate maker versus software engineer, but I think there are things that have been true at both places. So I'd say the best advice we ever got early on was to be really careful with those first 10 hires because they would set the DNA of the company. Even years later, those people have left, but maybe they've instituted certain systems or processes or cultural norms. And so just being really, really careful about that early DNA, it has been very effective. And I think it really did set like the culture of Plaxo and the culture of Dandelion, even if the majority of those people were no longer there after a couple of years. So there's that. I think we've been very careful with hiring. I think hiring is something that we've always tried to centralize a bit more, put some processes in. So it's not just this random thing. And especially, Dandelion, we often have people who are a little bit younger in their careers and maybe haven't done a lot of hiring. So we put a lot of like hiring training in place. We actually bring in task rabbits for people to practice interviewing on. We create standard rubrics where we do behavioral interviewing and try to try to remove various bias. And so, we're really trying to make sure that we get the people right, because that's kind of the main thing that's going to set the culture.
And so a bunch of questions there, and then I also still want to ask you about yourself and setting the culture. But when you talk through those first 10 hires, how do you go about, like, what are you looking for in those first 10 hires that were critical for you? And how did you make sure you did that without, I mean, especially in the startup, right? Maybe it's different with Dandelion, but certainly with Plaxo, there's probably some pressure to move quickly. And so if you're taking 6 to 12 months to make your first 10 hires and you're trying to go fast, that can feel like you're putting yourself behind the curve. So how did you deal with that sort of pressure to hire properly and well while also moving fast?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's the question of how much does it cost if you mishire? Like, what does one wrong person do to the culture and do to the company? And so I do think there's a trade off between speed and getting it right. But I think you can also go through the process quickly, but I think the process should have certain gates. So I think you do want to have a good phone screen. You do want to bring people in and ask the right questions. And again, we have like standard rubrics. We also do a simulation. This is something we used to do at Plaxo, and we do at Dandelion as well, where I remember at Plaxo, we used to hire people and they do super well in the interview, but then the first day on the job, like, they might not know how to do the actual task, or it's like, what would it be like to work there? And so we would build these simulations where it's like, what would it be like to work with this person for a day? And what questions do they ask? And can they do a task? And so we're trying to get it less about the interview, because there are people who are really great at interviews, but really bad at their job, and vice versa. We'd love to find the person who's really bad at interviewing, but is actually a great hire. I mean, that would be perfect. So we try to like have the interview be more than just the talking part, and, make sure that we don't do any groupthink, make sure that everyone kind of evaluates the person blind, puts in their notes. I think these are all things that are kind of like standard now, but it's definitely something we believe deeply in.
How many interviews do you like to, on average, do per person? Like, how many different people doing interviews, or how many interviews overall per hire? And does that differ, by the way, between like junior people and senior people?
Yeah, it does differ, because there are some roles where, like a barista, that might be an accelerated process, or it could be a little different. But generally, we like to do phone screen, which is just, getting to know them a little bit, standard questions. And then there's usually kind of a first round and a second round. If the second round with the simulation, first round, probably three different people interviewing for skills, team, adaptability, results, and sort of going above and beyond. The simulation, we try to really target for what the job is. If it's a barista, like making coffee, or customer service issues, or like a cafe manager, how are they going to handle a tricky situation? How are they going to handle a tricky situation with an employee? For a CFO, it might be a pretty big spreadsheet exercise or a presentation to the board. And so we really do try to say, like, well, if we hired this person and they're presenting to the board, like, do we like what they're doing? And so we don't want to figure that out later.
Yeah, no, for sure. Figuring that out later is so painful when that happens. And look, we've made mistakes at our company as well with hiring, and we always try to learn from it and see what can we do differently, or what did we mess up in that process. Walk me through as well. Like, I love the idea that you're doing sort of these practice interviews with like task rabbits. Like, what does that look like? How does that work?
For sure. And so I should first give a lot of credit to my wife, Elaine, who I get to work together with my wife, which is pretty awesome. And she actually had a startup that she started, and she sold to Google years ago too. So we kind of get a lot of her benefit, because she's really high on the recruiting side. And so her sort of philosophy or process has been about like a very she had seen a lot of cases where hiring at a lot of companies is just pretty much random. You get people in there, they all have their own ideas. They all say, like, I can tell who's a good fit within the first 5 seconds, and they don't challenge their biases. They don't actually, they listen to people's answers about what they would do in the future, rather than looking at what they did in the past. You don't focus enough on references. And so we said, like, we need to sort of take all of this learning and just make sure that we're using it to our advantage, which really is like, okay, if we're going to have our team members interview people, then they need to be given the skills or trained in the skills to actually be effective. So we train them in behavioral interviewing, asking, questions about, tell me about a time when you did X, and then really digging and digging and digging to get to the root of it, and figuring out, like, did they actually do that work, or was that their teammate, or was that someone else? And then, we sort of probe on different areas. Like, in some cases, you're really looking for skills. Do they have the right skills? But in some cases, skills is not the issue. It's really, do they do well in teams, or do they have adaptability that, business changes all the time. And, your job one day might be very different 2 years later. And are they going to be able to keep up with it? And then, so we walk them through the training, we do multiple sessions. And then before we unleash them on sort of, interviewees, we bring in task rabbits and have them ask all their questions. And then we do calibrations where we say, okay, rate them on this skill or this adaptability in 1 to 5. And then we go around and see like, well, how well calibrated they are. And that's really interesting because, half the people say they're a 5 and half the other people say they're a 2. And that means like, well, now we need to recalibrate everyone and sort of align everyone. And then if you do that enough times, then we get some really great expert interviewers who are baristas and other jobs who are just really good at sussing out who'd be a good team member. So it's been really beneficial for us.
That's really cool. So are you like almost back testing them? Be like, well, this person was the one who approved this hire. This hire turned out to be great, or this hire failed. This is a learning.
Yeah, a bit. We often, sometimes we hire someone and we say, that maybe was not the best fit, but it's like, I look through the interview notes, everything gets written up, every simulation, everything. And I look through it and I'm like, man, like, I don't know how we would have figured this out. And so do we need to change our process? Or, maybe part of it is, you're not going to get it right all the time. They say if you're doing well, maybe you still mess up 10% of the time on interviewing. And so then you just have to fix that and just kind of, like, I wonder how much slower it would be to get to 100%. And that's maybe not worth the trade-off.
Yeah, there's probably still some value in even having a few errors, because they can probably go the other direction too, where maybe you're making a mistake, you hire someone who might not have made it through, they turn out to be amazing in ways you were unexpected.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think there's definitely cases where some people have come in kind of through the back door or the side door and ended up being really good team members. And then we're wondering, well, then maybe we should change our process. So we're always trying to like evolve and make sure that we're doing things the right way, and sort of staying current as well.
And are the task rabbits, you tell them to like play a role? Like your role is to pretend to be a barista or something, and they kind of then answer questions as if they were like, I'm sure people would say, well, how can I do my calibration when we're interviewing a task rabbit who's not actually a person who's really a fit for this role? Do people push back in that way, or?
Usually we ask them to actually talk about their own experiences and whatever. We generally don't. It's funny. The first of these interview trainings we did, we invited in some of our friends, but they stuck around for the calibration and heard what people thought of them, and it was really kind of it was really a funny time. They didn't really enjoy it, so now we make sure that we do all the interviews and then later they leave and we do the calibrations and try to figure out like what is the, I don't know. It's really interesting when you get a case where someone's like a really great presenter, really great talker, but like underlying it, maybe they didn't really do the job in a good way, and really trying to suss out like, what are we looking for? We're looking for actual examples of work, not examples of talk. And that's like a hard thing to train for, I think.
Yeah, it's great. It is hard. That's actually a reminder for our interview process. I need to make sure we do that well. Have you ever hired any of the task rabbits? Like, imagine like the interview was so good, you guys are like, maybe we should just hire that person as an employee.
That's never happened, but maybe it should. That could be our whole new interview. That could be our whole new pipeline for hiring, is we just hire a lot of task rabbits and interview everyone and see what happens.
Yeah, it could be interesting. How much time do you spend? So how big is Dandelion right now? How many people are at Dandelion?
Well, so in the US, so we have a couple stores in Japan, but I'd say within the US, we're about 100 people. But, a lot of that's like chocolate makers. We have a few different cafes, so cafe staff, and then the corporate team's like pretty small, but we also have the online business. We're kind of a weird business because we make chocolate, we make chocolates, we make kitchen things. We also at the same time have an online business, have a retail business, have a wholesale business, and that to run it. So it's like kind of like 6 different businesses all in one, which makes it pretty complex.
I want to ask about the complexity in a second, but how involved are you in the hiring nowadays? Like, do you interview every single person just to like do a cultural check, or because some companies do that, right? Until they get to be really, really big, or did you only do that for certain roles? Like, how deeply involved are you in the process?
Yeah, so now I'm mostly involved in the senior hires, but what I like to do is there are a couple places where we wanted to institute certain, controls where, so like every hire, like I read all the interview notes and I read all the references and then I just say like approved. And that only takes like a minute or two. Then you get to know the people before they come on board. So I like to do that. But, the normal like bigger interviews or simulations, that's generally for more of the senior roles.
Makes sense. And then the last part about culture, how much does it come from you, right? So I know you said like, hey, those first 10 hires really critical, but I assume those first 10 hires are also a reflection of you as the founder. So what sort of mentality do you try to inculcate within that team that you think has been critical to your success? You're like, I want these people to reflect who I am, the company I want to build. What does that look like from your own cultural building and like who you are?
I would say that, and especially thinking back to Plaxo, like one of the rules we used for hiring was like, do we like this person? And I don't mean like, like biases with cultural fit and all that, but just like startups are hard and there's a pretty good chance that you're not going to make it. Like you could go out of business. And I think you'd want to look back and say, well, hey, even if this didn't work out, like I still had a great time and I still worked with people I really liked and respected, as opposed to like, man, I ground this out and like it was really unsuccessful, but like I also hated the people I worked with. Like these are people that I want to see every day and I enjoy talking with. And so I think like generally, Dandelion's like a pretty friendly, open place. I think most of us, many of us care deeply about chocolate. I mean, that's another thing we do is I think that especially for Dandelion, if you're hiring someone who's maybe not so into chocolate, 2 years later, they go off to start a yoga studio or do some, or they're going to their next thing. Whereas I think the people who are really in it because they love chocolate are going to stick around for a while because, we're one of the main players in the small sort of craft chocolate space. And so it just means that we'll have more longevity and a deeper connection to what we're trying to do and the mission. And so just kind of getting people who want to be here for the right reasons is also a big part of it.
And does that lead to how people work or how hard they work? Right? One of the sort of things that people think about, partially because they're just in the news all the time, is companies where the culture is one of just like nonstop work. Right? You have sort of like the Elon Musk type companies, Amazon a little bit like that. So Jeff Bezos companies, and a few of these other big ones where people work, it seems like insane hours and don't necessarily love their jobs, but hey, they create a lot of wealth from a stock market perspective. Do you find that mentality to be one that works really well for a lot of startups, or has not really worked well I mean, maybe Dandelion might be different than Plaxo, I don't know, but what is that sort of cultural work-life balance norm that you set up?
Yeah, I think it's different at Dandelion versus your standard tech company. I think like a lot of tech companies really are in a race to find product market fit. And so they're really out there and they have a really short runway and other people are entering the market really quickly and getting funded and popping up. And so, I've talked to a lot of like second and third time founders who are just like, oh, I'm just searching for product market fit. And if this doesn't work out this way, I'm going to pivot. I'm just going to fire half the team. I'm just going to make these really like hard decisions. And like, just like very just like almost like ruthless, just we're trying to do this thing, we're trying to exploit this particular market and we need the people to do this thing and it's only going to be a couple of years, people are going to leave anyway. And so it's just like a different mindset. And I think if you are trying to very quickly and rapidly explore a space that's a short-term opportunity with lots of competitors, then maybe you do need a culture where everyone is working 24/7 and is very like cutthroat. I think at Dandelion, we're trying to be around for a century, and we also have incredibly busy times and slower times. For us, like a lot of the business happens in November and December. And so in the summer, we're like working pretty hard to make chocolate and get things planned so that 3 weeks in December, it's crazy. And everyone is working super hard and packing orders and, going to the retail stores. But in the summer, it's a little quieter. And so we encourage people to take their vacations and live their lives. And we want them to be here for a long time. We're not trying to have people stay here for a year or two, get burnt out and then leave. We want people to be here for, we have a lot of people who've been here over 10 years now. And I think that's because we try to make it like, yeah, it's busy and it's hard and there's a lot of work, but that doesn't need to be every day. There should be, seasons and, and ebbs and flows.
Totally. And that's kind of life, I would argue, in some ways, is there it ebbs and flows. Do you guys do team events as well? Like, do you bring in your team from Japan and get everyone together? Or is it sort of like, that's too expensive to get the whole company together? We don't want to shut down our stores for a long period of time. Or what do you do on that front?
It's gotten harder as we've gotten bigger. And so they've been sort of more individualized. I know when we were a lot smaller, we were like 10 or 15 people. I had mistakenly said, if we hit this goal, and I don't remember what it was, some revenue goal, then we can all go to Hawaii. Like someone asked me, if we hit this revenue goal, can we go to Hawaii? And I was like, yeah, sure. And then like, I don't know, 5 months later, like we had hit the goal and I had kind of meant like if we'd hit the goal by the end of the year, and I guess it never specified, like we hit the goal. And so we shut down, like we actually found it was not that expensive to bring the whole team to Hawaii. Like we shut down the company for a couple of days. We went to Hawaii. We found a cacao farm and friend who could host us. And it was super fun. That's a little harder now to shut down the whole company and all the revenue for some amount of time. But what we try to do is either more individual team events. We haven't restarted all of this post pandemic, but like exchange programs where we send some of our American team members and swap them with Japanese team members so they can spend a month in Japan and try different things. Or we bring a lot of our team members on origin trips so they can see cacao being grown. I think we probably done 40 or 50, team members have been to origin with us. Either sometimes we do customer trips and they can tag along, or we've done trips where we bring them to origin. And it's really good because they get to see the world but also learn more about cacao. And someone comes into our cafe and asks about cacao pods and they can tell them firsthand about what they're looking at. So that's been really cool.
That's awesome. And when you think through, like you mentioned sort of complexity of the business today, right? And like what that looks like, how does that either hurt or help your ability to scale, right? I think a lot of the modern wisdom for most people is like be as focused as possible, right? Focus is the critical element to success. And it sounds like you've gone in a different direction. Now, granted, you're 15 years in, so it's a little bit different than your average sort of startup. But like, how do you manage that complexity and how do you make the decisions about whether you should do something new or not, right? How do you decide as a founder, like, okay, we're going to launch this new division or this new product line, because it does layer on that complexity, and complexity can be at minimum a anchor weight holding you back, and maximum could actually destroy you. So like, how do you balance that?
Yeah, I think it's a big challenge for us. And I guess like intellectually, I agree with you just need to focus on one thing because it feels right. But in my experience, it hasn't been right for us. The main reason being that unlike a tech or software company, we have things that have really long lead times. So we want to build a store. It might take months to get permit. Actually, we have a store that we're waiting on a year for permits. We have machinery that we order. It takes years to come. We order packaging. It takes months and months and months. And so we have a lot of things that you set in motion, but then take forever. And so if you really focused in a serial fashion, it would just take it would take the century to get there. And because we're trying to go a little faster, we almost have to be almost more like a multi-threaded operating system where every day we almost have to context switch and say, okay, today we're working on retail and we're pushing the store forward. And then tomorrow we're working on wholesale and we're pushing this forward. And sort of like jump around and kind of like in a very organized way, do this sort of like push forward on something and then move to the next thing, which I think is hard because you're always switching. But the thing that we've tried to do is really institute more systems to help with these. So for instance, we don't have like a monolithic ERP that helps run the business. We use best of breed software in all verticals, like Shopify for online, Square for point of sale. We use an event booking platform. We have all these different systems. And so what we've done is we've glued them together with a data warehouse where all the data from all these disparate systems come into one thing, which we then can sort of get to Google Sheets and democratize and socialize the data. And so what that means is every day when I look at all the metrics across the business, all we're really looking for is like, are we on plan? Is production on plan? Is confections on plan? Are sales on plan? Is retail on plan? And it's so much complexity. If you had to think about it, you would just need a massive team. Instead, we just look like we're on plan. Or it's like, oh, that was weird. We had a weird day at the ferry building yesterday. I wonder what happened. And then if that happens again and again, so it's almost like exception-based management, where it's like you set up all the complexity, you get all the data, you say, here's what things should be, and are they at our expectations? And anything that's kind of out of the norm in terms of expectations gets flagged. So it's not like 3 months later we're dealing with it. It's like, in real time we're dealing with it. And that's helped a lot. Otherwise, we would just need to have a much bigger corporate team.
Are you setting like OKRs at the beginning of the year? Like, how do you set and know if someone's on target or not? What are you doing to set those goals and expectations?
Yeah, we tried OKRs for the whole company and it didn't work as well as we had hoped, just in terms of like, by the time we got everyone in the company to do their OKRs, like, the year was over and it was just like, it was a little bit more process for the type of company we are. But so what we try to do is to set some pretty big strategic initiatives, like we're going to open some new stores or we're trying to grow online or like we're at the investment areas, and then make sure we have good teams of people who are working on those things. But in terms of the actual business, the thing that I didn't realize is like, it really is not like software where you just have like recurring revenue and it grows or you do releases. It's much more like inventory and assortment planning. Like, during the pandemic, before the pandemic, we were only a retail business because we thought people should come into the stores. They should smell the chocolate. They should taste the chocolate. They should try the chocolate. They should see us making it. And so in March of 2020, we lost, 80 to 90% of our revenue. And then we switched everything to online. And in that time, we actually made the same revenue in 2020 as 2019 by moving it online. But the thing that was interesting is that the online business happens in 3 weeks in December. So we had to like map out all of our plans for the year and get everything perfect and make chocolate all year while we weren't selling any chocolate. And then in December, we sold the chocolate for the year in those 3 weeks. So it means like the logistics and planning and assortment planning and having that all mapped out based on seasonality and previous years is like a pretty big job. And we have someone on the team, Dave, who's really good at it. And so at the beginning of the year, he maps out like, this is what I think is going to happen at this week at the ferry building. This is what I think is going to happen this week at the Fillmore store. This is how many of these products we need. And like, you actually have to map it all out. And then you do that hard work at the beginning of the year. And then you just say, am I on plan? And so that's helped us a lot, keep the complexity in check.
That must have been so scary in 2020 when you're like, we're moving everything to online and we have to make all this chocolate, hoping that you're going to have an online business that's going to go big. Like, how did you even have the guts to make that call where you're going to put all this money up into building up inventory for an unknown online business with not only it's an unknown business for you, whether it's going to work, but also who knows what the economy in the world's like because it's mostly shut down and people are freaked out. So that was a double sort of scary proposition. New market in a market that was unknown because the world was completely turned upside down. How did you make that call?
I don't think we had a choice. If we hadn't made the product, then we definitely wouldn't sell it because we'd have nothing to sell. And so we just had to believe that our plans were going to work and that all of the hard work we did and all the great products we made and all of the time we spent on the web and advertising would happen. And we had the product to support it. And I'm glad it did because, we could have had those 3 weeks not go well and we wouldn't be here. So it's just every year is a little bit of a nail biter, but we're getting better and better at planning.
And so going back to the planning overall and like the systems. So are you looking as a CEO, are you looking at like a dashboard of all these, from Stripe to Square and all these different tools every day? And you're just like, your first thing in your morning is like, I'm going to go look at these things. Or do you set aside day one is retail, day two is online? Like how do you break up your day to day to keep yourself organized and not overly distracted?
Yeah. So on the dashboard front, I ended up just building all my own dashboards because I got super annoyed because I want it in a very particular way. And I want to get daily emails with the specifics. And so I actually ended up having to write a Google script with a template language to get the I just want this in my inbox. I just want it to be exactly what I want. And we're not going to spend all this money on consultants and I know how to do it. So I'm just going to take a weekend and I'm going to stay up and I'm just going to do it. And it's so a lot of this is just I sometimes have to remind myself that I actually do know how to do these things. And then I just do them because it's I know what I want. I'm the PM, the designer, the customer, the programmer, I just it's going to take me a day. Let me just do it. And so, yeah, we have dashboards now for everything because once it's in the data warehouse and it's normalized, you just pull it into Google Sheets and you make it look wherever you want and it just updates automatically. And so every day we know what we made at every step of the process in production. Every day we know what we sold at every store kind of in real time. We know what our labor budget was. We know people clocking in and out through Zenefits. Once you pull the data from disparate sources and compare them, you have everything. So, and it's if you have to look at the data in retrospective and do forensic analysis, it's really hard. But if you just set it up right and you just look every day, you start to almost start to read the currents of the business where it's oh, this feels retail did well today. Oh, online, that feels light. And you just kind of get to know it. And so I like having that data just front and center every day. So you just kind of noticing it in the background.
Yeah. And I assume it took you a bunch of time to get this stuff in place. I mean, it's been 15 years. And I say this sort of from my own perspective. I mean, we're at Levy, my company, we're kind of a year and a half in, and we are starting to get a lot more data in place. And we're out tracking what's happening with every single one of our clients on a daily basis, how it's happening. We're actually starting to add in other things like track time. How much time does it take us to complete every task? And we're 18, 19 months in, and I think we're getting better at it, but it's one of those things when you think through back to Plaxo days, did you guys get similar data sets in place, or did you ever have that? Or was it just a little bit faster paced and sort of cross your fingers back then?
Even back then, we had pretty good data on the things we cared about. At the time, it really was about user growth. And, with Plaxo, the real question was, our original thesis for Plaxo was that we would have a viral engine for getting new customers with this idea that we would send out these emails based on your address book and enough people converted, then it would grow. And, we had done all this time to develop the system and to pitch it. And I remember, the day we launched, we got 100 users. And then, a couple of days later, we had 4 users a day. It clearly was not working. And we had raised $2 million. And we always had believed in this sort of viral equation that it's if each person brings in just more than one other person, then it'll explode. But anything less than that, it will die. And so you really do get this tipping point. So at Plaxo, there's kind of this weird time where it just was not growing, and we're about to run out of money and blah, blah. And one day we hit that tipping point and then it just exploded because we believed in the math and we did A/B tests to do conversions to say, our viral equation was really just number of emails sent times conversion rate. So it's what do we do? What are the features we add to increase emails? What are the features we do to increase conversion? We did A/B testing on emails, on landing pages. We set up the framework for letting anyone in the company suggest a new experiment and let that run live. And so all those little things we had to believe. And then one day it actually worked. And we're wow, that actually did work. So I do think in that case, we did measure the sort of most salient points, and that really worked out well for us. And in Dandelion, it's a little different because we almost have too much data, and we've had to sort of say, well, what are the ones that we care about and are really the kind of the KPIs that really drive the business.
Yeah. And then on that note of the KPIs, actually, does that all roll up into an overall KPI for the company? Is your North Star, we want to grow revenue, let's say like 20% year over year. And that's like the North Star. And then everything else sort of funnels down from that. Do you do that, or just each group have their own sort of North Star and it's not centralized into one roll up?
No, it does roll up. But I mean, ultimately, everything rolls up into finance and what we sort of report in terms of like actual business stuff. But like the challenge on the finance side is a lot of that data is like kind of delayed. So we don't really use that for decision making so much as we do for reporting to the board. But in terms of like the real time metrics, like we care a lot about sales, but we also care about contribution. Our business, again, like it took us forever to figure out how to even think about the business. And so for us, like we make things, we sell things, and we run the business. And so for making things, it's really a question of like, how much does it cost us to make a bar of chocolate, a really good bar of chocolate, or a really good, treat, or a hot chocolate? Like, what is our sort of gross margin, and like what are the driving factors on that? For us, it's mostly labor. It's actually not so much, even though we pay a lot for beans, it's not really beans. And then it's like each store, like how profitable is each store on its own? Like, the four wall EBITDA they call it, where it's like within the walls of the store, is it profitable or not? And then there's sort of like our fixed expenses of running the business. And so like for us, it's really been a question of like those things have their different like slopes in the way that they scale. Gross margin, some things are based on fixed costs, but some things are linear. Certain store revenue, stores definitely have sort of like a fixed amount of staffing, and then any top line revenue above that, like just as pure contribution growth. And then same with corporate, like you've got to like get a giant factory and build all these things and hire a team. But if you scale at a different rate than your gross margin or your sort of contribution, then it sort of can model out what the world will look like in the future. And so we think really deeply about kind of the slopes of those different aspects of the business that we're trying to scale.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And then I will say, by the way, speaking of like thinking through the financials of things, I actually got a gift certificate for my team to Dandelion Chocolate for my birthday. So when I went, I never thought I would purchase myself a $15 candy bar, but I did because I had a gift certificate. So I was like, why not? And I will say, now that I purchased it, I'm like, why would I ever buy a candy bar that's not a super high-end candy bar? Like, why waste the calories on low quality candy bars? But I think you were saying earlier, like when we were talking before the podcast, like you guys didn't even know if people would go buy a $15 candy bar, and it sounds like it actually worked. But you just said we want to make great chocolate and give it a test.
Yeah, it's funny. I think especially early on, people would say like, why is your chocolate so expensive? I can go to the gas station and buy a bar of chocolate for whatever. And it's like, then we bring them in for a tour and say, well, first we had to help build a global market for cacao. And then we had to go to all the various countries and make relationships with the farmers. And then we had to work with them to get better fermentation and, help support their farms and in some cases do investments. And then we had to bring them back. And then we had to like build a factory, rebuild our machines, blah, 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 like, sort, roast, winnow, the conch, temper, like all the steps. And like, when you actually look at it that way, our chocolate's like pretty underpriced for the value. And so we've kind of over time just kind of staked out a niche we're trying to just be some of the best chocolate in the world. And that costs money. And if you want the best chocolate bar, the best advent calendar, the best candy bar, it's going to cost more money. And that's true for phones. That's true for Apple products. And that's where we are in the market. And that's worked out a lot better than trying to like say we're super premium, but then not charge for it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the thesis is sort of saying like, hey, look, you know who you are and you're staying true to that. And by being true to that, it actually creates its own marketplace value and brand value for Dandelion.
Well, and not only that, but chocolate is an affordable luxury. I mean, in other industries like wine, you want to get the best bottle of wine in the world. You're going to pay a lot of money. If you want to buy the best chocolate bar in the world, you're probably not spending more than $18 to $20. And so I think the market still has a long way to go and is still like pretty underpriced. And the big challenge also, a lot of farmers, producers don't get paid enough for the work that they do. People have been addicted to very cheap commodity chocolate where the person who's really losing out, besides all the people eating it, are the farmers. And so we're kind of trying to do our part to elevate the whole industry.
Yeah, no, it's actually great. I love the way you put that, sort of it's an affordable luxury, because it's true. Like for the $15 candy bar that I bought, I would be spending probably 10x that money if I wanted to buy like a really nice bottle of wine. And both of them would probably last me about as long, because I try not to eat it all in one sitting. You drink it all in one sitting, of course. And so, yeah, no, it's a really good point. Speaking of that, I mean, one of the questions that I think a lot of founders don't do well, and it seems like Dandelion's done a pretty good job, and clearly you figured it out with Plaxo as well, is storytelling. And how do you tell your story as a company about who you are, why you exist, and what is the relevance of that storytelling to all elements of your business?
I think we could do a better job here. By no means have we figured it out, but for many years, our webpage was just a blog. where we just put up whatever was going on and we thought about and just try to get the story out there and tell people what we were thinking about and what we cared about and why. And I think we've always been product people where we just like to make things that we're really proud of. And people are often surprised when they drill down on the details to find out just how much thought and care we put into all sorts of parts of the business. Like when you scratch the surface, you might be surprised to learn just how deeply we think about these things. And so we always just felt like we should put the product out there and then let people talk about it. And we've been pretty fortunate that the people who seem to get it oftentimes are the press. A lot of like the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, all those like definitely have understood what we're doing and we've become friends with them. And it's been really good to help get the word out there because it's one thing for us to say, like, we think we're some of the best chocolate in the world, but it's another thing for a trusted voice to say those things. And so we kind of just feel like we're just trying to make some of the best chocolate in the world. For most of the company's history, we've been limited by how much chocolate we can make. We've been more production limited than demand limited.
Wow.
And so we haven't really been trying to like sell, sell, sell. We're really just trying to figure out how do we scale up in a way that we don't just become industrial chocolate. If all we do is become the next Hershey's, then we won't have accomplished anything, right? Like we're actually trying to do something good here and and not just like become this industrial whatever. And so we just have to be really thoughtful and very careful about how we grow. And in many ways have slowed things down than we could have done faster, just because we want to be really thoughtful about how we like stay true to our values.
What does that mean then for outcomes, right? When you think through, you have investors who, by the way, I should add, I wish I was an early investor because I believe early investors all got sort of a golden ticket, very much Willy Wonka chocolate factory style, where they just get free anything basically at the stores. One, actually, I'm kind of just curious because it's a fun side story. Like, what made you decide to do that? Like, you become an investor, great, put in X amount of dollars, and you get this free ticket. Is part of why you did that was because like, hey, like this, you might never get a return, so your return is going to be kind of free chocolate from our stores. Like, what made you decide to do that? And then in following up, of course, from that is, what is an exit strategy, right? Most companies of any sort, I think their goal is like, I want to grow as big as I can get to with as much revenue as I can with highest margins, and then achieve an exit, right? Either a sale or going public. What does that mean for you as a business? And how does that different once again from your sort of software days at Plaxo?
So, the world confectionery market and chocolate market is huge. It's, many tens or hundreds of billions of dollars. It's huge. It's big. And so I do think that there is a pretty big opportunity here. You think about what happened to craft beer and what percentage of the market that is. You think about, I remember when Starbucks came into my town when I was growing up, and it was like, what is this expensive coffee? And that was the first like fancy coffee I'd ever seen, and chocolate's still in the Folger crystals and Sanka days if we were coffee. So there's actually a huge, huge, huge market opportunity in the world of chocolate. And, we do have investors. We're not an art project. Like we do have to make money. We do have to build things up. We do have to be sustainable and growing. But I think the thing that's a little different is that the time horizon is different. This is going to take a while to build up, and, maybe someday we go public or we have dividends or we, really build it up into something meaningful. But like, if we were one of those like major companies, like I think there's a lot of economic value there. I think the thing we have to be careful of though is like, we don't just want to grow for growth's sake and compromise on who we are. Like we have to figure out how to scale craft. And that's the hard part. I think there are some craft companies that are kind of now going the mini industrial route. And like, that's not interesting to us. We never want to be in a situation where beans go in one side and bars come out the other and there's no human. Like we care about like the beans and where they come from and who's producing them and how are we roasting them and how are we thinking about them and how do they change from harvest to harvest and season to season. So we care about those things. So we do believe there is, potential exits in the future. We just think the time horizon is a little different. And then in terms of like what we do for investors, like, we're really fortunate that we're in Silicon Valley where there's a lot of people who've made a lot of money and want to invest in companies, but also be part of things and, share in dreams of building things. And, although this may be a longer investment compared to other people's portfolio, a lot of people have told me it's their favorite investment is, they get sort of chocolate dividends and they get golden tickets and they just get to be part of something really fun and awesome and kind of share in this dream with us and share in the world of craft chocolate. So I don't know. I think it's pretty rewarding and I think people like being part of it. And we're really fortunate that we're able to kind of team up with people to support us.
Do you think, going back to that story part, I mean, is that part of your story? Like you talked about some of these competitors who are kind of going in the more slightly industrialized direction. What has enabled you, do you think, stay just more disciplined and on your own story? Because once again, I can imagine the real interest and excitement that someone might have to become more industrialized, right? To get either the pressure from yourself or from your investors to like push it forward, push it faster, and almost cash in on that that brand that you built today and like, hey, let's go cash in and go a little bit faster. No one's really going to know the difference if the quality of our chocolate goes down just a little bit. And maybe that's how every good company dies. But also there's a lot of discipline that it takes to stay in that mindset versus trying to go faster or go in a different direction.
Yeah, I don't feel like we're competing with anyone. I feel like we're competing against ourselves. We're competing about, can we build this? We don't look at what other people are doing. We just say like, what do we want to exist? And then let's do that. And so we don't worry about that. But I would say on the industrial and growth side, like there are much easier ways to make money in Silicon Valley than an artisan chocolate factory, right? Like, so there are many, many, many easier ways and much less work, much less time, much less dedication. So if you're only doing it for the pure sort of short-term economics of it, that's like, you're in the wrong spot. We're doing this because we want to build this thing for the long term. And so it's like, if all we did was like sell out and become industrial chocolate, then that would not be a positive outcome. So we really have to do things the right way for the right reasons.
Yep. No, totally fair. Speaking of that, related at least, how do you think your role or the hats that you wear have changed over time? And it's probably the same at Plaxo, right? So you went from small 2-person company to 10 people to 50, then to 100. Early on, I'm sure at both companies, you were doing a lot of the code, you were building the servers, you were making the chocolate. And yet that's changed over time. What does that look like? What changes for you? And do you think you've done it the right way? Or are there things you maybe did differently or better with Dandelion that you didn't do at Plaxo, or compared to your friends at other startups? What have they done well and whatnot?
Yeah, I know early on, someone told me, and I don't know who, and I don't know if this is a well-known thing, but just like the difference between being a founder and an employee is like, normally when you're an employee, you join a company and you're always looking for ways to take on more and more responsibility. And you're trying to, increase your position and increase what you do and increase your responsibility and your sort of power and influence. But as a founder, you actually start with all of it. And what you're really trying to do is to give it away. And you're trying to give it away to people who will do a better job than you can and sort of parcel it out. And so I think there's nothing better than finding people who can help grow the business and sort of take care of an area and do better than you can. That's really, really rewarding. And so in terms of growing it, on day one, I was in there making the chocolate, I was making the machines, we were doing all the real estate, all that. And over time, we brought in more and more people to help, which is really nice. We got some amazing team members on the chocolate side and the confection side and the kitchen side and the machine side. We just have really good people to do all of these things. But there's still areas of the business where it doesn't make sense to have a full-time team member or consultants, and we just have to jump in and get it done and learn new things. And in some ways, that's the most fun, to take on new challenges that we haven't seen before, or like economically doesn't make sense to bring in the right people, but we just have to do it. And so, yeah, I think the role's changed a lot, from literally making every chocolate bar and going to every farmer's market to, I'm doing a lot more of the businessy things, or, helping oversee things, which is rewarding in its own way, but it's just a slightly different than being in there actually with chocolate all over my apron.
Do you think that is something that changes as well with other companies? Like if you think through your friends or other business leaders that you've seen to be successful, is it still also the same thing? They're giving away different parts of their job on a regular basis and they're really good at delegation? Because there's also founders who are really bad at delegation. In some ways, they are ultra controlling, but also find success. Like, are there maybe just different strokes for different folks, or better ways to do things that you found?
Yeah, I think there are multiple ways to be successful. I think there are different products, different markets, different approaches. And, there are companies that do really well with the founder that has control over everything. And there are companies that do well with people that are more letting things go. So I don't know, like, I think all I really know is what we do. And, we've got a great team, and we like to have people share in this and kind of share in the joy of chocolate and have things to work on and have some ownership and accountability and do more than we can. So I don't know. I don't think there's one size fits all for companies.
Are there any common mistakes that you say, like either you made at both Plaxo and Dandelion, or ones that you see your friends make, or just every founder make, that you're like, man, if I could think ahead of myself, I would avoid these? Just mistakes. You're like, yeah, I just wish I didn't make these.
Sure. I mean, you run a business for a long time. You definitely make a lot of mistakes and you learn. We try to make new mistakes. We try not to make the same mistake over and over again. We try to like have it be something new. But mistakes, I don't know. I often talk to a lot of like early founders who are starting out. They ask for advice, and the thing that I see a lot of is people trying to solve problems that they don't have. and saying like, the big problem for my business is like, what's going to happen when I have a million users? Like my servers aren't going to scale. And I was like, well, that's not an actual problem you have. The problem you have is you have no users, or you don't have an engineer. And so I think the people who spend too much time solving problems that don't exist just add a lot of early complexity to their ventures. And then later that early complexity like is not the way you should solve the problem anyway. So it just is a total downside. So I think we subscribe more to the like one step in front of the other form of entrepreneurship, which is like we take something, we try, we learn. I remember the first day we opened the cafe or the first day we had pastries. And I look at the pictures and I'm like, wow, like we're a lot better than we were the first day. But you know what? We just had to start. We had to do something. We had to see what worked. And every day we just make it a little bit better than the day before. And it turns out if you do that for 10 years, like it's going to be pretty good. So yeah, you just have to keep iterating.
How do you force that mindset though on the team? Because it's really easy as a founder to dream, like especially when you're in the depths of something just not going well. It's really easy to be like, oh, I just want to dream about the big day when it's all just working properly. How do you stay focused to say, hey guys, like let's just do this one thing this week or this month or this quarter, and ignore this big dream we all want to get to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to have the big dream so people see where we're going and what the idea or the vision is. But in terms of practical problems and where you spend your time, there's just like so many things that go wrong every day. And more so, I would say, at a chocolate factory than software. I remember one week we had like a major machine break. We had our upstairs neighbor flooded our factories. We lost a week of production. We had like an ADA website thing. We had our storage provider go down. Like the things that go wrong every day, like in the physical world of machines and permits and regulation, is just enormous that you really just have to take it day by day and just say, what am I gonna get over today? And because if you didn't, otherwise you just die.
Yep. No, and actually mentioning regulation, I wanted to ask about that really quickly. So there was a great article that was published recently about Prop 65 and how Dandelion has sort of a cheeky way of dealing with Prop 65, which I think is about cadmium or something, just like some like toxin that theoretically is in chocolate, but also of course in all leafy greens. How do you think about dealing with regulators? Like as a software startup, right? There's plenty of software startups, like Uber is really a famous example where they just sort of said, screw regulators, we don't care. We're going to just change the entire world. Um, how do you think through just regulation and government involvement in a business overall in managing that complexity, or is that cost of doing business? It's just part of it. How do you deal with it? And also keep a little bit of cultural fun, because you guys had a cheeky way of providing the warnings, but making it cheeky.
Yeah, I mean, I think some amount of regulation is good. I mean, I like not eating poisonous foods or having water that's bad. Like, I think we can all agree on some baseline level of regulation is good. I would say, though, that in the software world, if you want to start a company, you basically just start typing and you are limited by, does the market like it or not? If you want to start a business in San Francisco, you have to go to City Hall and wait some number of years. And so imagine if the whole tech industry, it's like, you want to start your company, like, let's wait for a bureaucrat to sign off on it. Like, it's just, you would never have the culture of innovation. So, and I believe in building codes, I believe in all those things, but it makes it very hard to accomplish. So it slows things down. And so, but we obviously follow all the laws, but like some things like Prop 65, if people don't know, Prop 65 was originally intended to clean up water, and it did a great job. But it also had this thing where, if like, I think with chocolate, you'd have to eat like, 1,000 bars a day for your entire life to have any potential, whatever. And they've never actually seen a case of cadmium poisoning in humans. Like, it's only if you work in the cadmium mines or you like smoke a lot, like that this is actually a thing. But because in California, anyone can sue you over this, every business just puts up signs everywhere for everything. And of course, like people see those signs and they get scared about, what does this mean? Like, am I getting poisoned? And, there are actually some reporters who've kind of maybe not taken a nuanced view and have scared a lot of people. And so what we try to do is like give people the information. If you look at our sourcing report, we actually publish all of our lead and cadmium levels and everything. And we try to explain like what is going on, how should we think about it? But I feel like nuance is not something that goes well on headlines. And so we just try to get the message across as best we can and try to be honest so people can trust us.
Yeah, and you said it in a funny way. I mean, so people know. I mean, basically, I think I'm going to misquote this properly, but basically, like, well, like, we have to warn you about cadmium. At the same time, if you're really worried about this, you should stop eating all leafy greens as well. And that's sort of the funny part.
Yeah, chocolate was actually a big target of Prop 65 because there are people you could sue and make a lot of money. But there's no like spinach lobby that you can sue. There's no, and it's funny, we've sent spinach to the lab. We've sent French fries to the lab. We've sent lots of things to the lab just to see. And I mean, I think like, again, it's sort of well intentioned that people do want to be safe and they do want to make sure that what they're eating is not going to harm them in any way. But the way that things are applied just means that it makes people think about the wrong things, is kind of making people worry about things that are not issues, but then actually obfuscating things that are issues. So the kind of implementation of the law sort of has had a lot of unintended consequences.
Yeah, no, for sure. Jumping topics quickly, how do you think through your own sort of personal health rituals, work-life balance? What does that look like? What are the hours? Do you find yourself different from when you were straight out of college, probably eating pizza and coding nonstop 24 hours a day versus today? Like what's changed, or what advice would you give yourself if when you were a young early entrepreneur as well? Like maybe start with like, what are your rituals today for work-life balance? What does that look like? How many hours are you generally doing work-wise as a founder?
I mean, I basically work all the time. I wouldn't say, it's just I work on different things. So like on the weekend, it's like, oh man, I got the weekend. I don't have to do a lot of email, but like I actually get to work on some other things that I really enjoy working on that are less the grind and more the fun part. But I'm still working on the company all the time. Or when we go travel, visit other chocolate shops or chocolate producers. And so there is really, I don't think it's fair to ask the team to work 24/7, but I think the founders, like I think, this is kind of your life and you are kind of signing up for the grind. And if you want to have an easy life or not stress or not deal with things, like maybe entrepreneurship is not the career path, because that just kind of goes to the territory. And like, like I said, there are many times we could have and should have gone out of business. There are times we've almost run out of money. There's times like the pandemic, there's, all sorts of things that you can't foresee, and you're just kind of signing up for it. And so I don't know. And in terms of rituals, I don't have it's not like I wake up every day and do meditation or anything like that. Like, but what I do every day? I eat chocolate every day. I don't know if that's a ritual, but it's part of the business. It's part of my job, but it's a tough job. And somebody's got to do it. So I guess I'd say that I still care so much about the product and what we make that I do consume it every day, and I'm happy to. And so I think if there ever a point that I didn't do that or I didn't get joy out of chocolate, then I probably wouldn't be the right person to be leading the company.
Do you break that up with personal life at all? I mean, is it like, or is personal life sort of molded in because you get to go, your travel is also work travel? Is it all just sort of molded into one because it's so much a part of who you are?
I think at this point, yes. Especially the last couple of years have gotten so busy, like since the pandemic, where there isn't. Now, I would think like maybe if we get a bit bigger, then there's more room to hire some more people and hand off more of that responsibility to other teams. But like ultimately, the work has to get done, and so it has to get done. So but again, like it's fun to travel, and like it's really nice. Any city we travel to now, there's some chocolate person there, and they usually have heard of Dandelion or know us, and so it's actually really fun. It's a fun way to see the world.
That's an awesome way to see the world. Do you find, when do you decide when it's time to bring someone new on? Like, in other words, when do you get to a point where you're like, I'm doing so much of this job that I actually should hire another person for it or find a way to outsource some of that work? Is there like a breaking point that you have sort of, where you're like, okay, it's time to take this off my plate?
I think it's hard because I think there are many areas of the business that would benefit from having more people. But I also think like economically, like especially for a chocolate factory, like it's the contribution that has to pay for that. So for instance, if the business has like a 20 or 25% contribution, so a dollar of revenue turns back, say 25 cents of profit or whatever that needs to pay for the fixed corporate expenses. That means if you hire someone, if you hired someone at say $200,000, you might have to add a million of top line revenue to justify that. So when you really look at the economics, you have to be very, very careful and say, you know what, can I do that myself? Or like whatever. And so we just have to be really kind of careful, because every team and every department and every person would like someone else to help them with their work.
Yes.
And in many cases, we set up the right systems or the right dashboards or the right alerts. Like maybe we don't need those two people, or maybe we don't need another $2 million of top line revenue. It's just like, so we just have to be really, really careful. And there are certain areas that we definitely there are a lot of areas where, especially in talking to our investors, it's like, okay, well, are we being foolish? Are we being too frugal?
I was going to say, sound foolish, maybe, right?
Yeah. I mean, if any mistake we've made, that's probably one of the big ones, is like when you're really trying to keep things in check, like maybe you're not investing enough in online growth, or maybe you're not investing enough in stores. And so for us, it's really a question of like, what are the one or two bets that we want to take above our sort of standard operating procedures, and be careful about those? Because I think if we just kind of like just let all the hiring happen, I think we would quickly go out of business.
Do you have a heuristic about whether to hire, like outsource people to do certain tasks versus bring someone in-house? Like, how do you think through those two decisions?
Yeah, I'd say that pre-pandemic, we were almost entirely internal. Everyone was here, worked on site. I'd say since the pandemic, we've had a lot more people who worked remotely, and that's actually worked out pretty well for us. We have people in many different countries that help us with things like, guest care. And so I don't know if we have a real heuristic, but I think there are certain roles that are just very, very hard to hire for in San Francisco. And you can get a sort of, you can hire well for them elsewhere, especially in kind of a more hybrid remote world. So I don't know. Sometimes also consultants can be a bit more of a, you can try it out beforehand and see if there's value, or have them just help out for, there are many places in the company where we just need someone to help for 3 months to do this thing, but then we don't want to then keep paying beyond that. So that's kind of been good for us, just projects.
Yeah. And then I guess that implies, though, you have to do a pretty good job scoping that project. So do you force the team to think through like very carefully, like what is the project we need done and why? Like, are you writing like a product or project brief to be like very specific, or how do you think through that?
Yeah, we usually do. But I mean, honestly, I think sometimes you could do better because sometimes you don't really know the capabilities of the person or what they're, like you kind of have to feel it out as well. And, sometimes you write up the perfect spec, but like that's not exactly your expertise. You didn't get the right people. And so sometimes it's a little more organic. But I think we often like when it's more of a fixed time or a fixed project thing, just because if you get it wrong, it has an expiration date.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it keeps the cost lower in that sense. I mean, I'm certainly a big believer in outsourcing as much as you can early on as you figure things out. One of the final questions I like to ask people is there a single piece of advice that you would give to every single entrepreneur to achieve excellence? If you have to boil it all down to one thing, what is that one big thing you think people should focus on to achieve, once again, this excellence and success that I think you found in your career?
That's a great question. Well, let's see. Well, I think there's sort of like before you've started the company and then after. Like, I think in terms of being a founder, I do think founder has the lowest barrier to entry of any job. And so it's like, you're thinking of starting a company, like you should do it, right? Like just get out there and do it. And so the first step to being excellent is actually starting. And so if you're thinking about starting a company, I'd say just go ahead and do it. In terms of the excellence once you started, all I really know is my own experience. And I think for me, the thing that's been important is just being true to why we started and what the whole point is. I think like once you start a company, you get a lot of competing demands. You have investors, you have the press, you have products, you have your own personal finances, lots of things wrapped into this, your identity. And like just remembering like why you're there and like what success actually is, because you never want to, at least for me, I never want to be in a situation where we like are successful, but it's not, we kind of lost sight of who we are, what we tried to do. And so I think to be excellent, you kind of have to know yourself and where you want to go.
Yeah, it's great advice. And it's something that a lot of companies, you find them pivoting or changing their mindset. And it's like, no, instead just say like focused and remind yourself why you got into it and why you started on a regular basis.
For sure.
So Todd, how can people find you, learn more about Dandelion? What can they do to get in touch if you're open to that? Tell folks what they can do. Go get some good chocolate.
Well, for sure. So if you've never had a Dandelion chocolate bar, or if you've never had a craft chocolate bar, I would definitely recommend that you try ours or maybe your local craft chocolate maker. There's lots around the country. From the original 10 of us that were started, there's now over 200 in America craft chocolate makers bean to bar. So you might have one in your local neighborhood. You can certainly come into our stores in San Francisco or Las Vegas or Japan and try our chocolate. You can order online. And then if you want to get in touch, you can always reach out to us. We can answer things about chocolate. We can answer things about entrepreneurship. We have an email and a guest care info@Dandelion Chocolate. We're always happy to chat with other good people.
Well, Todd, thank you so much. And to everyone listening, I highly recommend you go to Dandelion, go order some chocolate for yourself. Affordable luxury is a really good way of putting it. And if you're local, go get their European dipping hot chocolate, basically just a super thick like shot of chocolate, which actually, by the way, truly is European. I remember getting it as a kid when I was in France with my parents. And we always had to go to Europe to get it. And now I can get it a few blocks away from my house. So thank you for making that a reality and possibility. Of course, now my son's addicted to it too. So that's a set of problems, one we can deal with and manage. But Todd, thank you so much for the time. I sincerely appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much for helping tell Dandelion's story.